The portrait is still aging, secrets hidden in the shadows of the attic. I never meant to come back here. The old house on Dunmere Lane stood like a rotten tooth in the middle of the forest, half swallowed by moss and ivy. It belonged to my mother's side of the family, though no one had lived here in decades. Not since the winter my grandmother locked herself in the attic and died. I was the last one left. My mother had passed 3 years ago, and my uncle Henry, the one who used to pay the taxes on this place, had simply vanished last spring. The county wrote me, asking what to do with the property. I suppose I should have sold it sight unseen, but curiosity is a funny thing. I told myself I'd drive out here, pick through whatever was salvageable, and sign it over for demolition. I arrived on a grey morning that smelled like rain and mould. The key Henry gave me years ago still fit the lock, though the door sagged on its hinges as I pushed my way inside. The house felt colder than it should have, as if it held its own weather system. I stood in the foyer, staring up at the tarnished chandelier swaying slightly above me, and wondered if the house even remembered what warmth was. I made my way through the rooms. Most of the furniture was covered in yellowed sheets, and those I pulled away revealed clouds of dust and mouse droppings. In the dining room, the long table still bore a faded lace runner, and in the kitchen, cracked dishes lay scattered on the counter as though someone had fled in the middle of preparing a meal. It looked like a place abandoned mid-sentence. It wasn't until I reached the second floor that the unease began to crawl under my skin. At the end of the hallway, the attic door waited a narrow hatch in the ceiling with a pull string hanging like a noose. I remembered my mother telling me never to open it when I was little. I'd asked why, and she'd said, "Some things are meant to stay hidden." She never elaborated, and I never asked again. But now, alone in this echoing mausoleum, I felt the old, terrible pull of secrets. I could have left then, told myself there was nothing up there worth seeing. Instead, I found a chair, stood on it, and tugged the string. The attic ladder creaked down. Cold air spilled over me, carrying a dry, sour smell that made my eyes water. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and climbed up. The attic was larger than I expected. The beam of light swept over trunks and boxes piled haphazardly, some gnawed through by rats. I saw a rocking horse, its paint flaking away, and a cracked porcelain doll staring blankly at me with one good eye. And then I saw it propped against the far wall, half covered by a moth-eaten tarp. I don't know why I went straight to it. Maybe I could feel it watching me. I pulled the tarp aside and stepped back. It was a portrait, an oil painting, easily 4 feet tall. The frame was gilt, cracked in places, but still beautiful in a decaying way. The subject was a woman seated in a high-backed chair. She wore a pale blue dress, her hair dark and pinned up in a style I couldn't place. What struck me most was her face striking, though not beautiful in the usual sense. Sharp cheekbones, eyes the colour of storm clouds, lips parted as if she was about to speak. But there was something off. Her skin was blotched with dark spots, as if rot had set in. I leaned closer. The brushwork was exquisite, so realistic that the folds of her dress looked like they'd rustle if I touched them. But her hands, they were gnarled, bony, like those of an old woman. I checked the bottom corner for a signature. There was none. I don't know how long I stood there, studying her. Eventually, I noticed something scrawled on the back of the canvas. Eleanor 1883. My mother's name was Eleanor. So was my grandmother's. A floorboard groaned behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, but the attic was empty. Only my own breathing, ragged and loud. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound, and turned back to the painting. That's when I saw it, the woman's eyes. They weren't just painted grey, there was depth to them now, like glass or polished stone. I could swear they had shifted to look directly at me. I backed away too quickly, my foot catching on a box. I went down hard, my flashlight skittering across the floor. In the dark, the attic seemed to grow larger, deeper, as if I'd fallen into the canvas itself. I crawled after the flashlight, and when I clicked it back on, the portrait was still there, but her face looked older now. More lines, more spots. The corners of her mouth curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. I stumbled down the ladder and slammed the attic door shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest, sweat dripping down my back despite the cold. I should have left then, sold the house, burned it to the ground. Instead, I stayed. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my mind playing games after hours of driving and dust and stale air. But that night, as I lay in the master bedroom, the one that had belonged to my grandmother, I heard footsteps above me, slow, dragging footsteps, pacing back and forth across the attic floor. I buried my head under the pillow and told myself it was just the house settling. In the morning, I found a single grey hair on the pillow beside me, long and coarse, like the strands pinned up on the woman in the painting. I tried to leave then, packed my bag, threw it in the car and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed and died. I tried again, same result. My phone had no service, and the landline was a dead wire draped across the hallway like an empty vein. So I stayed another night, and another. Each evening, the footsteps grew louder, closer. I heard them descend the attic ladder, cross the hallway, stop outside my door. Once, I saw the doorknob twist, though it never opened. On the third night, I dreamed at least, I think it was a dream, that I was standing in the attic again. The portrait was gone. In its place was a mirror, tall and black as a pond at midnight. I approached it and saw my reflection, only it wasn't me. It was her, Eleanor. Her skin sagged and wept with open sores, her eyes dull and milky. She raised her hand, and I raised mine too, mimicking the motion. But then she stepped forward, pressing her palm against the glass, and I felt it dry, brittle fingers brushing my skin. I woke up screaming. When I looked at my palm, I found a smear of what looked like ash. I told myself I'd leave at first light. I'd walk the 10 miles back to the main road if I had to. But as dawn broke, a storm rolled in thick black clouds pressing against the windows, thunder growling like a threat. I stood by the front door, bag in hand, but I couldn't make myself turn the knob. Something in the house didn't want me to go, or maybe I didn't want to go. The truth is, I'd started to feel drawn to the attic, to her. That afternoon, I climbed back up. I don't know why. I think I wanted to see if the portrait had changed again. It had. She was older now, her skin sagged like wet paper, her eyes sunken, teeth yellowed and crooked in a rictus grin. But there was something else. In her lap rested a baby, swaddled in a white blanket. The baby's face was blurred, unfinished, just a smear of pale paint and shadow. I reached out to touch the canvas. The surface was warm, pulsing, almost. And I swear I heard a voice then, whispering behind my ear. It said my name. I spun around, but the attic was empty, except for the drip of rain leaking through the roof. When I looked back at the painting, the baby was gone. Just Eleanor, grinning wider now, her teeth too large for her mouth. That night, I heard a new sound, a baby crying somewhere in the house. It came from the attic, then the hallway, then right outside my door. I lay there, paralyzed, listening as the cries turned into wet gurgles, then silence. In the morning, I found small, muddy footprints leading from the attic ladder to my bedroom door. I'm writing this now by candlelight. The storm hasn't let up. The house feels smaller somehow. The walls lean in. The shadows stretch longer than they should. I know I should be afraid, but I feel calm. I want to see her again. I think I'm starting to understand. The portrait is still aging. It's waiting for something, for someone. And I think that someone might be me. I wish I could tell you I left the next morning. I wish I could say I fought whatever pull the house had on me. But the truth is, I didn't even try. I think, deep down, I'd already decided I needed to see it through this thing that my mother and grandmother had hidden away like a festering wound. The storm pounded the roof for 2 days without rest. I slept fitfully in my grandmother's bed, listening to the wind rattle the window panes like bony fingers. At night, the baby's cries came and went, sometimes just beyond the door, sometimes inside the walls. The footsteps returned too, slow and deliberate, crossing the hallway to stand outside my room. I began to recognize the pattern. The steps always stopped at the door. Then I'd hear a soft scratching like nails on wood and a whisper that might have been my name, or might have just been the wind. On the third morning, the storm broke. Sunlight cut through the grime on the windows, and for a moment, I thought the house might look less haunted in daylight. But the air smelled of mildew and something fouler now, like meat left to rot in a warm attic. I made coffee on the old gas stove, drinking it at the kitchen table while staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I knew I should try to leave Hike out to the road, find help. But every thought circled back to the attic. I had questions now, heavy as stones. Who was the woman in the painting? Why did she age? And who was the child that kept appearing and disappearing from her lap? After breakfast, I wandered through the house, looking for answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I found a box of my grandmother's things in the master closet, brittle letters bound with twine, a rosary missing half its beads, a cracked photograph of a young woman in a wedding gown, my grandmother, Eleanor, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize. Tucked into the bottom of the box was a faded journal. Its cover was velvet once, now worn bald in places. My grandmother's name was pressed into the inside cover in blocky, childish script. Eleanor Hartwell, 1947. I sat on the floor and began to read. Most of the entries were mundane garden chores, recipes, gossip about the neighbours, but the tone shifted around the time she became pregnant with my mother. She wrote of nightmares of a woman who looked like her but older, rotting, appearing at the foot of her bed. There were entries that rambled, lines scrawled over each other. She says the child is hers. She says I stole her life. The portrait knows. The portrait sees. One passage made my stomach flip. The baby was never meant to be born. She made a bargain with the thing in the attic. To be real, to live, but it was never her life to have. I read those lines again and again until the words blurred. A bargain? A baby never meant to be born? Was my mother the baby she wrote about? Or someone else? My head ached. I set the journal aside, but I couldn't stop thinking about that line. The portrait knows. I felt as if the house itself was listening, waiting for me to put the pieces together. I went back up to the attic. The portrait was worse now, Eleanor's face sunken, her hair sparse and white, scalp peeking through in yellowed patches. Her eyes had a milky film over them, yet they seemed to track me as I moved. And in her lap the baby again. This time its face was clearer, tiny features, doll-like, but warped somehow, as if the paint had bubbled and blistered in the heat. Its eyes were empty hollows, mouth fixed in a perpetual scream. I heard something behind the canvas, a wet, slithering sound. I bent low, listening. The wall behind the painting pulsed, and for a moment, I could swear I saw something shift beneath the old plaster. A vein, blue and throbbing, snaked down from the painting into the floorboards. My hands trembled as I reached for the frame. I don't know what I planned to do, maybe pull it away from the wall, break it, burn it. But when my fingers brushed the canvas, a cold shock jolted up my arm. My vision blurred, the attic spinning around me. And then I was somewhere else. I stood in the hallway, only it wasn't the crumbling ruin it was now. It was new, the wallpaper fresh and floral, the floors polished to a shine. I heard a baby crying somewhere close. A door swung open by itself, revealing a nursery pale blue walls, a rocking chair, a crib. A young woman sat by the crib, humming a lullaby. I recognized her instantly, my grandmother, Eleanor, but younger, her belly still round with pregnancy. She turned to me. Her eyes widened, but not with surprise, with horror. She mouthed something I couldn't hear over the baby's wails. Then the shadows behind her thickened, pooled like spilled ink. From that darkness, the older Eleanor emerged, the one from the painting. Her skin was grey and cracked, mouth drooling black liquid. She reached for the crib, skeletal hands grasping. Younger Eleanor screamed, lunging to block her, but the older version pressed a palm to her stomach, and the young woman convulsed, her eyes rolling back. The baby's cries fell silent. The older Eleanor cradled something that looked like a bundle of shadows, then turned to me. Her smile was a ruin. "You were never meant to be," she hissed. Neither was she. I stumbled backward, the nursery dissolving into darkness. When I came to, I was on the attic floor, the painting looming above me. I was shivering, my skin clammy. My watch told me 2 hours had passed. That night, I dragged an old trunk across the attic door, wedging it shut. I didn't care if I damaged the ceiling, I just wanted a barrier between me and that thing. But the footsteps came anyway, louder than before. I heard the ladder unfold, heard the trunk screech as it slid across the floor by itself. Something scraped at the bedroom door, a whisper, a soft thud, then silence. When I opened my eyes at dawn, the door was ajar, and on the floor, in a trail from the hallway to my bed, were muddy footprints small, like a child's. I tried to piece it all together, the portrait, my grandmother's journal, the vision in the nursery. A thought kept circling my mind like a vulture. Was I the baby that was never meant to be born? Did my existence come at some horrible cost? I felt a sick, gnawing dread, a sense that something about me had always been wrong. I packed what little I'd brought, determined to leave the house behind forever. But when I stepped outside, the forest was thick with mist. The path back to the road, a tunnel of shifting shapes. I took a few steps before the mist swallowed the trees whole, and I heard the cry again, the baby, faint but persistent, echoing through the fog. I turned back. I don't know why. Maybe the truth was that I didn't want to leave anymore. Maybe the house had me by the bones now. I made a fire in the fireplace that night, the first warmth the place had seen in years. I fed it old papers, rotting furniture, broken picture frames. The portrait, though, I left untouched. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. It felt like killing something alive, or something that was part of me. I dozed by the fire, the house creaking and settling like it was breathing. Sometime before dawn, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Not the attic this time. These came from the basement door, slow and steady. I knew I should stay by the fire, but I was beyond reason now. I picked up the old brass poker and crept to the basement door. The knob turned under my hand like warm wax. I descended into the dark. The basement was colder than the attic, the air heavy with earth and mildew. My flashlight caught shelves of old preserves, rusted garden tools, broken furniture. At the far end, a shape hunched in the shadows. It was a cradle, antique, wood carved with roses and vines. It rocked slightly, though no breeze touched it. As I approached, the rocking slowed, then stopped. Inside lay a bundle of cloth, stained dark. I leaned closer, the cloth shifted, and I saw a face, grey and waxy, eyes sealed shut, a baby, dead for decades, yet perfectly preserved. My stomach lurched, bile burning my throat. I staggered back, the beam of my flashlight catching the walls, and there, carved deep into the stone, was a name, Eleanor. It wasn't my grandmother's name. It wasn't my mother's name. It was mine. I fled up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I pressed my back against it, gasping for breath, the brass poker slipping from my sweat-slicked hand. The portrait's whisper came to me then, though I was 2 floors below the attic. It seeped through the walls, the floorboards, into my bones. "You were never meant to be born," it said. "Give her back." The fire sputtered in the hearth, casting long, clawed shadows across the walls. I felt a pressure in my head, as if something inside me was trying to claw its way out. I remembered my grandmother's journal. She made a bargain with the thing in the attic. What bargain? For what? I stumbled back into the living room and collapsed onto the couch, the old springs groaning beneath me. My eyes drifted to the window. In the garden, half hidden by weeds and brambles, I thought I saw a figure, a woman in a pale blue dress, hair pinned up, watching the house. She raised a hand, and though I couldn't see her face clearly, I knew she was smiling. I shut my eyes, but behind my lids, the portrait waited older now, impossibly old. Its paint cracked and peeling. The baby in her lap was no longer just paint. It moved, it breathed. And it looked just like me. I didn't sleep after I saw the baby's face in the portrait. Sleep felt like an invitation, an open door for whatever watched me from that rotting canvas to crawl into my dreams, or worse, crawl out. I sat by the fireplace until dawn, the dying embers painting the walls in bruised shadows. Outside, the garden pressed up against the windows, a ragged sprawl of weeds, bare trees, and half-toppled stone markers I'd mistaken for garden decor. But that morning, when the mist lifted, I realized they weren't decorative at all. They were grave markers, small ones, barely more than rocks with initials carved by an unsteady hand. I needed answers, real ones, not just the whispers and glimpses that left me doubting my sanity. So I did what I should have done the moment I arrived. I went into town. The old village 5 miles away was a place where nothing changed. The diner still smelled like burnt coffee and fried eggs. The old men still sat at the counter, nursing refills while the world outside rusted away. They watched me when I walked in a stranger, yet familiar somehow. One of them, with a red nose and skin like tanned leather, called out before I even reached the counter. "Eleanor's girl, huh?" he croaked. I froze. "Which Eleanor?" He cackled, a sound like twigs snapping. "Aren't they all the same?" I forced a smile and ordered a coffee I didn't want. When the waitress brought it, I asked if she knew anything about the Hartwell house, about the woman in the portrait, the attic, the family graves. She crossed herself, eyes darting to the old man at the end of the counter. "Best let the dead lie, sweetheart," she said. "Some stories aren't meant for daylight." But the old man spoke again, louder this time. "Your grandmother used to come here, sat right there where you are now, said she'd heard the portrait whispering in the walls. Nobody believed her, but I did." He leaned closer, breath sour with stale tobacco. "Did she tell you about the first Eleanor?" I shook my head. He smiled, a terrible thing that showed his missing teeth. "There was a girl, long before your grandmother. They say she was born wrong as stillbirth, but she didn't stay dead. Her mother claimed she heard the baby crying in the walls at night, like the house had taken her in. When the family painted that portrait, it started changing, aging like it was carrying the girl's soul. Generation after generation, it kept aging. And the girl, she never was born proper. Not really." My hand shook so badly I spilled coffee down my sleeve. "But that's just an old story, right? Just folklore." He leaned back, eyes like glass marbles. "Go look at the family plot behind the house. You'll find her stone there. Eleanor Hartwell, born and died 1883. He paused, voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp. "The portrait's her. She never left." I thanked him and fled before he could say more. Back at the house, I forced myself through the overgrown garden. Thorns caught my jeans, roots clawed at my boots. I found the stones beneath a dying birch tree, their carvings faded almost to nothing. One of them, half buried, read exactly as he'd said. Eleanor Hartwell, born and died 1883. I knelt there in the weeds, fingers tracing the shallow cuts in the stone. A dead girl, yet the portrait aged. My grandmother's notes, the crying baby, the vision in the nursery, they all made a sick kind of sense. The girl who never lived had found a way to cling on, siphoning life from the ones who came after. I thought of the name carved in the basement wall, my name, the cradle, the thing inside it that looked like me. I was part of it. I felt that truth settle in my bones like ice. I don't know why I called him. Maybe I needed someone else to see it, to tell me I wasn't insane. Or maybe I just needed to hear a voice that didn't come from rotting wallpaper and old portraits. His name was Daniel, an old college friend. We drifted apart years ago, but when I heard his voice on the other end of the line, warm and real, I felt like I could breathe again. He agreed to drive up that night. I could hear the worry in his voice, even if he tried to hide it. He arrived just after dusk, headlights sweeping across the trees like searching eyes. When I let him in, he hugged me so tightly I almost believed the house couldn't touch me anymore. "God, you look like hell," he said, half smiling. I laughed, the sound brittle. "You have no idea." I told him everything, the footsteps, the attic, the vision, the grave. He listened without interrupting, though I saw the doubt flicker behind his eyes when I mentioned the baby in the basement. "Show me," he said. So I did. We stood in the attic first. I yanked away the tarp and let him see her the portrait, now so decayed that Eleanor's face looked like crumbling paper, yet the eyes burned clearer than ever. "Jesus," Daniel murmured. I don't even have words." He reached out, but I grabbed his wrist. "Don't touch it." We went down to the basement. I showed him the cradle, the bundle inside. He stared at it for a long time, then turned to me, his face pale. "This is some kind of mummified. You need to call someone. The police. A priest. Both." "Would you believe me if I told you that's me?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, I begged him not to sleep in the guest room. We barricaded the master bedroom door with a dresser, dragging it across the floor until the walls shuddered. I fell asleep with my head on his shoulder, the rhythm of his breathing steady and human. Somewhere in the blackest hour before dawn, the baby's cries began again, louder this time, echoing from the attic, the basement, the walls themselves. Daniel sat up, rubbing his eyes. "It's just the house," he said. "Old pipes, rodents, you know." But when the footsteps started heavy, deliberate, his bravado slipped. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then a long, splintering groan as the dresser scraped forward an inch. Daniel jumped up, pressing his back to the door. "We're leaving. Now." He threw the door open. The hallway beyond was empty, just darkness and the faint reek of mildew. Then a shape moved at the end of the corridor, the woman in the blue dress, her face a ruin of torn skin and hair drifting around her like weeds in black water. Daniel slammed the door. "Stay here." Before I could stop him, he was out, poker in hand. I heard him shouting, "Stay back! Stay the hell back!" Then the clatter of something metal hitting the floor. A scream ripped through the house, raw and gurgling, cut off as suddenly as it began. Silence. I waited for hours. I don't know why. Hope, maybe. Stupidity. When I finally forced myself into the hallway, I found a smear of blood trailing to the attic ladder. And there, at the base, lay Daniel's phone, cracked and flickering. His coat, his shoe, but no sign of him. I climbed up. I don't know what I thought I'd find, that he'd be waiting, that this nightmare would make sense. Instead, I found the portrait, older than ever. Eleanor's eyes were sunken into pits, her smile split wide to show a mouth full of rotted teeth. And in her lap, the baby more defined now, its face unmistakable. Daniel's eyes. His mouth frozen in a silent scream. The canvas pulsed. I heard the whisper, "The portrait must be fed." I stumbled back down the ladder, bile rising in my throat. The house groaned around me, wood splitting in places like dry skin. I felt it then, the truth I'd been circling since the moment I stepped inside. The portrait didn't just age, it consumed. It took from the living to keep the unborn alive, piece by piece, generation after generation. And now that it had Daniel, it wanted me next. I ran to the basement, my mind a cracked mirror. I tore up the cradle, shredded the rotting blanket, smashed the cradle into splinters. I found a rusted spade in the corner and began to dig at the stone wall behind the name carved in my own handwriting. Brick crumbled under my fists. Dust choked me. Behind the wall, I found a cavity, a space just large enough to crawl through. Inside was another portrait, older, even more grotesque. A version of Eleanor I hadn't seen before, not just rotting, but skeletal, jaw unhinged in a perpetual grin. Her hands stretched out, and in each palm, a shriveled fetus curled like a dead spider. There were jars, 24 of them, sealed with wax, each holding something unidentifiable, lumps of hair, teeth, what might have been fingers. The smell was unbearable. At the very back of the cavity, I found a small wooden box. I smashed it open. Inside was a withered, blackened cord, an umbilical cord, tied with a lock of dark hair. A voice in my head, my grandmother's, whispered, "Burn it. Break the chain." I clawed my way out, the stone tearing my skin. I dragged the box upstairs, threw it into the fireplace. I piled the portrait on top the older one, the second one hidden behind the wall. The flames caught fast, licking at the canvas, the painted flesh blackening and curling like paper. The house shuddered. Somewhere above me, I heard the portrait in the attic, howling a sound that started as a woman's cry and turned into something that wasn't human at all. The fire spread too quickly. Old wood, dry as tinder, fed it until the walls themselves roared. Smoke clawed at my throat as I stumbled outside. I fell into the garden, coughing, watching the flames lick through the attic windows. Behind the glass, I saw her one last time, Eleanor. or what was left of her, pressed against the window, her face bubbling, eyes like dying stars. Then the roof caved in, sparks rising like fireflies into the dawn. I don't remember walking to the road. I don't remember the fire trucks arriving, or the neighbors standing at the edge of the forest, clutching their robes and muttering prayers. I remember only the baby's cry, echoing behind my eyes, even when the house was nothing but ash. They found me half-conscious by the road, wrapped in a blanket of ash and smoke. I remember the paramedic asking my name, and when I told her, she flinched like I'd struck her. Maybe I imagined that. Maybe I didn't. They kept me in the hospital for 3 days. Smoke inhalation, dehydration, minor burns, but nothing compared to the rot I felt inside. I told the police what they needed to hear. The house was old, the storm had loosened some wiring, and the fire spread too fast. I left out the attic, the basement, Daniel. His name echoed through the sterile halls. They searched the ruins but found nothing, no sign he'd ever been there at all. No body, no footprints but mine. They let me go with a bag of stale clothes donated by a local charity. I called Daniel's parents from a payphone. His mother answered, her voice tight with dread. He told me he was going to see you, that you needed help. Where is he? I opened my mouth. The words I wanted, he's gone. The portrait took him. I let it, curdled on my tongue. I don't know, I lied. He must have gone into the woods. Maybe he got lost. I hung up before she could ask more, before she could hear the trembling in my voice that would give me away. They made me stay at a motel while the insurance people circled like vultures over the charred carcass of the Hartwell house. The first night there, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the TV screen. I still smelled like burnt wood and old secrets. I kept hearing the baby's cry in the pipes. Once, I woke to find grey hair on my pillow. Long strands, just like hers. I told myself it was stress, trauma, my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I felt it the sense that I hadn't killed it, that the portrait hadn't really burned, not the way I needed it to. A week later, the fire chief called me back to the ruins. They'd found something in the basement, he said, something they thought I should see. The house was gone, a skeleton of blackened beams and piles of ash that steamed in the rain. The garden was a crater of upturned soil, grave markers cracked and scattered. He led me to the remains of the basement. There, half buried under a slab of charred concrete, was the cradle. Untouched, pristine, as if the flames had parted for it. Inside lay the same swaddled bundle, not mummified now, but fresh, pink, perfect. A baby that looked like it had just taken its last breath. A baby that looked like me. I stumbled away, bile rising in my throat. The chief said something about calling the medical examiner. I didn't hear him. All I heard was my grandmother's voice, hissing from the bones of the house. She made a bargain with the thing in the attic. To be real, to live, but it was never her life to have. That night, back in the motel, I pulled out my mother's old letters. I don't know why I hadn't burned them too. Maybe I wanted one last piece of the truth. Most were brittle, half faded with mildew, but one, at the bottom of the stack, was newer, dated just weeks before my mother died, addressed to no one, or maybe to me. I see her in you, the first Eleanor, she's always waiting. You were never supposed to be born, you were her vessel, her second chance. The portrait binds her to you, and you to it. When you die, she'll live. When you live, she ages. She'll never stop, unless you break the chain. My hands trembled as I set the paper down. I remembered the umbilical cord in the box, the hair, the jars in the basement wall. A chain. My grandmother called it life stolen generation after generation to feed a girl who was never born right. I stayed up all night, pacing the motel room like a rat in a cage. I wanted to run to vanish into some city where no one knew the Hartwell name. But the truth pulsed inside me like a tumor. It would find me. It always had. So I made a decision. I drove through the night, the back roads empty under a cold sliver of moon. I knew where I was going, the family plot behind the ruin. I needed to bury what was left. I parked by the splintered fence and forced my way through the brambles. The graves waited, half swallowed by mud. I found the one that mattered. Eleanor Hartwell, born and died 1883. I dug with my hands until my nails split and bled. I pulled the cradle from the trunk, the baby's waxy skin already greying in the dawn mist, and laid it in the hole. I covered it with dirt, stone, salt, from the kitchen of the motel, every old superstition I could remember. When it was done, I sat on the grave and waited. For what? I didn't know. But the whisper came anyway. This changes nothing. I don't remember the drive back. Just the cold, the ache in my bones, the sick certainty that I'd only buried a shell, that the thing itself was still inside me, growing like rot. I checked into a different motel under a fake name. The first night, I dreamed of Daniel. He stood at the foot of my bed, eyes sunken, mouth stitched shut with grey hair. He pointed to my stomach, and I felt it then, a stirring, soft and wet. I woke screaming. The sheets were soaked through. I went to a doctor in the next town, told him about the cramps, the nausea. He ran the tests, poked and prodded until I felt like a specimen in a jar. When he came back, his face was pale. His hand shook when he handed me the results. "It says here you're 2 months pregnant," he said. "But that's not possible, is it? You said you've never." I didn't hear the rest. My ears filled with static. Behind my eyelids, I saw the portrait again. Not on canvas this time, but in the glass of the doctor's office window. Eleanor's ruined smile. The baby in her lap, its eyes open wide. I left town that same day. I don't know where I'm going, only that I can't stay in one place too long. The thing inside me grows stronger each night. Sometimes I feel it kicking. Sometimes I hear the baby's cry in the wind, or see grey hair coiled in the drain after I shower. People think horror is ghosts that rattle chains, or monsters that crawl out from the dark. But the real horror is this, that something born wrong can live through you, remake you, feed on your life, until there's nothing left that was ever yours. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the painting still aging, somewhere I can't reach, waiting for the day I'm gone, so she can finally be born the way she never was. So she can walk the world in my skin. And I wonder, when the portrait stops aging, will she look like me? Or will she look like the thing she always was, a child that should never have drawn breath? If you ever find an attic door in your family's old house, with a pull string hanging like a noose, don't open it. Don't touch what waits behind the canvas. Because the portrait is still aging. And she is still hungry.